remove myself as soon as it comes in. Sheesh. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in again. Right now, I have Chris Hood, who's the CEO of Muddy Robots Games, and he's going to be doing a presentation on From Dreams to Demos, the ABCs for your indie studio. So the stage is yours now, Chris. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Super excited to be here. Hello, everyone. Fabulous session so far. Looking forward to the rest of the day. So, a little bit about myself. I am Chris Hood. I am a customer strategist, a podcast host, a public speaker, author, and even a professor. I have over 35 years of experience in media and entertainment and gaming. I have previously worked for companies like Disney, Universal, Electronic Arts, Google. In 2008, I co founded Blind Squirrel Games, and I also founded 4 of the IGDA chapters, most of them in the Southern California region. And as already mentioned, I'm also the CEO of Muddy Robot. We're a small 15-person studio, and we are getting ready to release our first title, which is very exciting. But we're also making some really stupid decisions, but very strong, inspirational goals for sure. We'll probably get into some of that as we progress through this presentation today. So, we are going to talk about the ABCs, and for the sake of it, we'll keep the alphabet going. Also, a D, the essential strategies for indie games to get you up and running and to get your mindset in the right place so that you can be successful. And there's a lot of things that we could potentially cover in this conversation, but I don't want to get too all over the place. And so I've tried to keep it down to some of the 4 basic items. As an example, will come up. There's obviously legal issues. There's some marketing stuff that we are going to talk about, sales. There's a lot of stuff that you have to be aware of. But I really wanted to try to focus in on a mindset of how you can think so that you can be successful. So, A, ambition. B, build. C, communicate. And that gets us to D, our demo. And if we are thinking about ambition, that's where we're going to start. This is all about defining your game's vision and setting realistic expectations for your studio. I think too often we get into these big, wide ideas, and it's beneficial for you to really get it into a very precise spot so that you can activate and implement something that is doable, as opposed to this massive content and idea that just can't be achieved. So we're going to go into that and also talk a little bit about how do you build that, and then how do you start thinking about communicating. Again, there's a lot that goes into communication, but we're going to talk about internal communication and external communication and how that looks. And then, of course, what we should expect from a demo, and how polished it should be and what it should look like, and how you should think about that. So a lot of thinking for us today. And here's the first thing for us to think about. Gaming is really a blend between art and business. And so what that means, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this before, is if you go into a museum, you're going to be looking at art, and a lot of art is interpretive. You're going to have mixed feelings about what that represents. Business is pretty straightforward. There is a rhyme and reason and clear strategies that are effective in business. And so, even though we can say, hey, this is a business, you have to follow these steps in order to be successful, there is the artistic side of it, which creates this really unique blend that is, again, unique to media and entertainment, and especially gaming. But you can't forget the business part. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is just that. Let's think about ambition. So if I was in a room, I would be asking people to raise their hands. You can put it into the comments section if you want, because I would love to come back and read this. But I would say raise your hands for option 1 or 2. If you had to choose one of these, you were creative, you set up your indie studio, you were creative, you were able to build and then launch a game. That's option 1. That's all you did. You could be as creative as you wanted to, and you could launch a game. Or option 2, which is you formed a team and your game actually made money. Which one would you pick? Again, I would love to be seeing hands right now because I have an instinct that most people are probably picking option 1. And that's the challenge for us because there is a clear difference between ambition and passion. And ambition is not passion, just to be clear. I think a lot of times we talk about, and I hear this in interviews and people I talk to, oh, I love games. I'm very passionate about building games. I'm passionate about this role. It always drives that passion in us. Well, passion is an emotional driven response. We think about it idealistically. We tend to think about it with our personal motivations. Like, I really want to get into the gaming industry because I'm passionate about games. That's a personal motivation. We have our own aspirations, like, oh, I would love to create this amazing, epic game that everybody loves. Well, that's also an aspiration that tends to be driven by passions. And of course, also creative expressions, which we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a moment. But all of these are passion based. If we think about ambition, that's where we get into more goal oriented and market awareness. Is the idea sustainable? Will it have outcomes? What are those outcomes? What are the KPIs and metrics that we are going to shoot for? And it's also business focused. So if we think about the earlier statement, art versus art and business, there is some balance in here. The art is typically that passion side, the ambition is typically that business side. But if we were to go and break this down, option 1 is really about focusing on the game. Whatever you want to build, that passion is about focusing on the game, your creativity, what you've built, and what you've launched. But the ambition is all about the process. It's about building teams. It's about building processes and building something that is going to help you generate money. At least that's our goal. I think there are a lot of people here who just want to build games. And maybe if you ask them, they don't care if it makes money or not. But I would also argue that I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that want to make games to make money. And that is the process. This is a mindset that you have to change. John Romero said once, execution is everything. Success is not defined by an idea. It is determined by your ability to execute on that idea. And this is it. It's not always about putting the passion into a specific idea, especially if you are trying to create a game that is, say, underwater squirrels that are farming atoms in order to save the environment in outer space on a distant moon that is ravaged by zombie plants. you know, like you could go on and on and on, and you've got some brilliant idea that is brilliant to you. That's passion. Successful games fulfill a formula. And it's unfortunate, but what we do see is that about 96% of indie games don't make money. They don't make money because they are not necessarily following the tried and true processes of design and implementation and structure. And I'm sure there are people out there saying, well, wait a second, like we need to break those molds. Oh, no doubt. There are so many opportunities for us to break the mold. I often call it cookie cutter gaming that is out there, multiple clones. Heck, I am the first one who will tell you that I absolutely hate sequels for games. But there's reason. Not only is there a risk factor there is this idea that they are able to consistently generate money. But if we put that aside and we say, yes, there is opportunities to break the traditional gameplay and styles of games out there, you can still do that by following processes. And that's what you have to think about. And here's a process for you. This is a process that I developed in a book I wrote last year My book is called Customer Transformation. It's a business book. There is some gaming elements in that, but the philosophy is simple here. We want to start from the outside perspective. That means we are actually starting our game design with the player. We have to talk to people. We have to understand what they want. We have to do research. We have to investigate what people are saying in social channels. We have to take all of that information to determine what the player wants. And again, I'm sure I'm hearing this right now through the screens. Well, I'm a player and I know what I want. And if I want it, there's going to be other players who want it too. That's not research. And I'm going to show you an example of that in just a moment. But we start with the player. Then we think about the device that that player is going to be engaging on. And then from there, we start to think about the game that they are going to be playing on that device. And then we start thinking about how we're going to promote or build communities, social around that game. Then we think about the culture or the team that's going to build that game. And then the technology that we're going to use to help us build that, the platforms, the engines. And then we start to think about the benefits that the studio is going to get from that. So that's outside in. And if we think about this in reverse, there are probably a number of you, a lot of you, who have done this in reverse. They've started with the studio. They've thought about the technology they want to use. They go and hire a bunch of people or bring a bunch of people onto the team and start to define what the culture of their organization is. They go and blast across social media. Hey, we've got a new studio and here's what we're going to be doing and here's our culture. And then they start thinking about the game and they start to build a game that they want. And then they think about what devices they're going to go on. And then they go out and they try to figure out if the player is even going to be interested. And this backwards approach, what we would say inside out, does not help you in the process of building games. You have to start with the player. Or in business, you have to start with the customer every single time. This is not something that you can argue, because if you do not have players, you do not have a game that they will want to play. And if you think about this, not just the process that has to be around figuring out what the player wants, you have to actually talk to them, ask them, and continue this process repeatedly. That means that if you have, we often think about like, oh, we've got an alpha test and we're going to start to include players in the process. Oh, we have a beta test and we're going to open the invite and have people come and play. And we're going to get that feedback and we're going to improve the game. That's too late. If you think about this, you should be asking people what they think about your game every week. Every other week, some type of process on an ongoing basis to help you understand if you're on the right track. And this is one of those areas where we're not going to get into, well, what about an NDA? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people like, I need to have an NDA in place. I need to have people sign this before I can show them the game. I would say go talk to an attorney. There is actually a legal section later today. Go watch that, see what they have to say. I'm not going to get into what my recommendations are on this, but I'm sure that is a part of the process for getting in front of players and actually talking to them. I've said this, it's in my book. If you believe you know what your customers want before asking them, you are more likely to lose those customers. If we think about it purely from the business perspective, and there is a lot of examples of this out there, you are going to alienate customers and potentially players who do not want to then come and play your game. I'm writing a new book right now, and one of the chapters is on Wendy's. And earlier this year, Wendy's announced that they were going to do surge pricing so that at any point in time you go into a Wendy's, the price of a burger could be higher or lower based on the time of day, sort of like an Uber model, but for fast food. Well, all of Wendy's customers were outraged and basically said, we're not going to do this. And a couple of days later, Wendy's did a promotion, $1 burgers, to try to offset some of the bad publicity they got. And this is an example of they went out to market with a new idea without first talking with their customers. They could have talked to all of their customers. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? And they probably would have all said, it's a bad idea. And then, hey, look, you would have saved yourself all the PR nightmares because you would have actually listened and didn't do what, you would have did what they asked you to do. That's what you want to think about. You have to do your market research before you build your game. Now, that's hard because a lot of people want to start building the game. That goes back to our outside in perspective. You have an idea for your game. You want to start building your game, and you don't care what the market says. That is wrong. And when we think about the type of feedback we want, here's a note. Your friends, your significant others, your parents, your relatives is not market research. I've often joked about this, but I have my mother. She actually lives with me. And every so often I'll go down and I'll say, hey, I've got a great idea. And I'll pitch the idea to her. And she'll respond like, oh, that's a fabulous idea. And that's when I know, like, oh, wait, I've got to actually go talk to real customers and do real market research and really understand what the market is telling me. You can't do that by talking with friends. You can't do that. Like if you're in a guild and you're playing a game and you're like, oh, I really wish we could do this or that's a closed, narrow market. And it does not necessarily represent the broader market for your game. So you've got to go and talk to people before building your game. This is all part of the process. This is all part of actually thinking on the right path for success with your indie game. That gets us to build. So let's think about building your game, building your demo, building what are we going to build? So if you wish to be a writer, write. Epictetus, of Epictetus. That's it. Epictetus. I can never say his name, but he was a Greek philosopher back in the 150 AD, roughly. Another way we can look at this is if you wish to be a game developer, develop. Chris Hooditis. Editus. Chris Hooditis? Chris, sure. We'll say that. I mean, we've seen similar types of quotes before. Basically, if you want to do something, go and do it. Don't talk about doing it. Don't blast on social media that you're doing it, but behind the scenes, you're not doing it. There are a lot of indies out there that get the idea of let's form a studio, and you form a studio and then you sit around all day talking about what you're going to do. Do the research and then actually start developing. Indie game developers only typically make one game. Now, you would think that if they've put in all of the effort, they've done all of the training, they've figured out how to build games, and they continuously were to improve on that game and go through this process, you would think that they would take what they've learned and they would go and do another game. But that's actually not what's happening. This is because they are focused on the passion. And what happens is the passion runs out or your mana is gone because you get exhausted. Why? Well, because building games is hard. It's hard. It's hard. I think we can all agree on that. We get it. We've heard it before. The process is the first part, but the building is the most critical part. You have to go and build something. Back to John Romero as an example, he made 90 games before making Doom in 1993. We could argue that Castle Wolfenstein was probably his first major success, which was the game just before Doom. But if you think about it, 90 games before making Doom, which catapulted his success. And even he says, give yourself time to there's a thing in my way to get good and don't be dissuaded by setbacks. Game development is like a game. Load your save and try again. I think this quote is fascinating because it is all about learn, improve, and repeat. And if you can get into that mantra of just learning and continuously improving and repeating the process, that would be good. And look, like I keep saying, you have to get to a point where you are just building something. For us at Muddy Robot, we started our project almost a year ago, but we had a playable demo of our game on week 1. And so we actually went through the process and we've continued this process of we figure out what we're going to work on, we build something, and we test it every week. And we get together as a team, we all log online and we do a playthrough of the game every week. And this process of it doesn't matter what it is, but we are going to deliver something of value to the game on a weekly basis is how you have to think about this. This can't be about, well, what are we going to do this week? Or what are we working on? Or, oh, well, something fell through. We'll get to that again. Okay. And then all of a sudden you've gone a month and you haven't actually done anything. You've got to build. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of indies are faced with is this basic question. And I'm going to get to what that question is, but I'm going to ask also, if we were in an audience, I would be doing this right now. What do you think all of these companies have in common? And we could say, yes, they're all successful. Somebody's told me that a couple of days ago. I was showing them the deck. They're like, oh, they're all successful companies. Yes, they are. That's great. But by chance, do you see or do you know of any other things that have make these brands have in common? Well, here's what it is. And this is going to be an interesting one. I would love to see people's faces and responses on this. They all started their company without paying their employees. So this is one of those challenges that indie studios are faced with. Money. How do we build a game? How do we build a demo when we don't have money? But I need money to build my game. No, you do not. Of course, money does make it easier, but the reality is no, in today's world, we do not need money to build a game. Follow the processes. There are more than enough tools out there. There are more than enough people out there. There are lots of opportunities for you. And there are ways to do this without money. Now, that might contradict a lot of people. I know that there have been some discussions about, legalities of this and everything else. But I go back to that list, like from a traditional startup perspective, most organizations start by getting people together, agreeing on some sort of structure, and then going and building. Not talking about what they're going to do, but actually building. So lack of money, really, from my perspective, is an awful justification for not starting to build your game. I've talked with and consulted with several different studios over the course of the years. And one of the big things that I get back is, I'll ask them, like, where are you in the process? How far along are you? How are things going? I'm just checking in. I'd love to hear how things are going. And the typical response is, well, we haven't started because we're waiting for funding. We're still trying to pitch. Well, I'm going to tell you a blunt reality. There are very few people who are going to be able to get a publishing deal or a investor into your organization without proving that you've actually been able to build something. And so that is what your focus needs to be. And I'm going to give a little quick note to salespeople who are out there and potentially listening. If you're a salesperson trying to sell some sort of service and you're contacting indie studios, just understand most of them don't have money. So you're wasting time. I get probably 100 cold emails, sales solicitations, probably a week. And I have to either politely reject all of them or just ignore them. A lot of them go to my spam folder. So if you're salespeople trying to contact me to sell me something, one, there's no money. And two, you're probably in my spam folder because I don't need it. And I'm sorry, but I just wanted to share that friendly note with some salespeople. If we go back to how we do it at Money Robot, where we have a weekly process, if you're familiar with the agile processes for software development, that's really what we're doing. We have weekly sprints with a set of tasks. So, say task one, task two, task three. This is what we are going to work on this week. And if we don't get to something like, say, task three, we don't get to, we'll move that over to week two, we'll readjust. And then in week two, we'll do task 4 or 5 and get to task 3. And same thing, because things got shifted over, we might have needed to now move task 6 over to week 3. We'll just restructure that and we'll continue. And for each one of these weeks, we have on Monday, we have a meeting to discuss what we are going to work on for the week. And then on Friday, a playthrough of the demo and determine what went well, what didn't work, and what we should improve upon. And also in there, we are regularly talking with people to show them the game, introduce them to ideas we have, and see what the feedback is, and taking that feedback to incorporate it back into our game design. And that is the process. Continually doing this week after week after week after week. That's why there has to be ambition. You have to want to do this, as opposed to, I really want to build the game of my dreams, because that typically doesn't fit into this nice, neat, agile process. Communication. What is communication? I know we know what communication is, but let's also think about this statistically. Prioritizing internal transparency before promoting your game externally is the best approach. Once again, I talk a lot about people who are going out on social media, talking about everything that they want to do, and not really talking about what matters to them in the master scheme of things. 55% of leaders believe their organizations are very transparent, but only 18% of their employees agree. This is critical. This is not only an external perception about your company, but it does impact how you perform, how you bring people together, and how you are successful. So you have to continuously think about how you are communicating with people across the board. And some more stats for you. 85% of employees feel more motivated by regular updates, and are 4 times of transparent companies have higher levels of engagement. And again, this works both internally and externally. I mentioned we do regular weekly meetings and regular weekly updates. And we see that our employees are much more engaged and much more satisfied with what they're working on because of it. And when we think about this from an external communication perspective, if you can be transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you're working on, and be genuine in that process, when you are talking with players to understand what they want, you're actually listening and returning that back to them. Like if you begin to ignore them, or if you begin to say, oh, thanks for your feedback, but don't actually do anything about it, that's where we start seeing a lot of organizations have problems. One more stat for us: 94% of consumers prefer brands that practice transparency. And so if you think about any of your favorite brands that you engage with, think about if they are actually being open and honest and transparent with you, or if you feel as if they are hard to reach, or you're being put into some sort of bucket, or you're treated like a number. All of those things impact our feelings towards brands. The same goes. There is nothing different in this when it comes to your studio. The way people feel about your studio is going to impact whether or not they want to play your games. So stay open, transparent, and communicate. Here's another marketing challenge. And again, marketing is another session, or there's a couple of sessions on marketing later today, which I'm eager to tune into and watch. But if I was to present two kind of problems here, problem one is not enough money to help with marketing, which once again, there are a lot of indie studios out there, which is why their game doesn't actually see the light of day, is because they're not spending money in marketing. So that is definitely a problem. But also, problem two is you're using the wrong marketing strategies. So this is one of those balancing acts as well, where you can actually use some successful marketing strategies that require no money and help you be more successful. This goes back. Money doesn't necessarily solve everything. It helps, but it doesn't necessarily solve everything. There are ways that you can do this without money. I think a lot of people think, well, look, if I go onto social media and I start to build up the audience and I tweet about it or X about it, is that my what it's called now? I don't know. If I post it on LinkedIn, if I do my social media to my network, it's going to get a lot of publicity, and if it can only go viral, we'll be hugely successful. If I can get a couple more people talking about this, we'll be hugely successful. But reality is that you need to scale. You need thousands of you who are out on social media talking about this. You need tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are actively posting on social media, oh, this game that I just found is awesome. That scale is the hard part. You're not going to accomplish it alone. And even I've got a team of 15 people, and even if all 15 of us go and actively promote it on social media, that's not enough. You have to be able to scale the conversation. And that means that you're going to have to get an army of people, whether it's, I'm not even necessarily suggesting influencers in this package, but you have to think about ways that you can reach people and have them help you talk about your company or your game. Here's a question. When we think about market research, it's not only about what the players want in terms of game style and game genres and reward systems. All of that is required. Go talk to the players. But also, you need to do market research in how to market your game. And so here's an example. If you were building a mobile game today and could only launch on one platform, either Apple iOS or Google Play, which platform would you choose? And I'll give you a moment to think about that. And again, if we were in an audience, I'd ask for people to be raising their hands. But take a moment and think about what you chose. Like, did you choose Apple or did you choose Google? And then answer these questions. I chose the platform because it's the device I use, right? So, hey, you're an Apple user, and so of course you naturally picked Apple iOS, and that makes sense. Or you chose a platform because you believe it is the more popular one. So if I was just to ask you, which one do you think is more popular, Apple or Google Play? Which one do you think? And you said, well, I think it's Google Play. So I picked Google Play because I think more people are on that one. Or I chose a platform because my game's demographic uses it. Now, this one might indicate some sense of research. Market research has happened. And so I picked it. And maybe you're like, well, typically Google Play people like my type of game. So that's why I've chosen that one. But this is where market research actually comes in. And if we were to look at the actual stats, we'll see this. As of 2023 and 2024 Q2 in comparison, Games on iOS is substantially higher than games on Google Play or even on app downloads broadly. And the amount of money that is being spent on iOS is substantially more than the amount of money spent on Google Play. And actually, theoretically, well, mathematically, maybe if you look at it, if you look at games on Google Play between 2023 and 2024, not much, $100 million, give or take. It has actually gone down over that year. So this is an example of, well, if I did my market research, my argument would be if I could only pick one, I would pick iOS because clearly more people are on iOS, more games are on iOS. They're making more money off of iOS content. So purely based on the data, removing the emotional component to it, I would start building on iOS. That's how we think about market research. And here's a level 100 tip. And this should get some good feedback and controversy, I'm sure. Video game marketing is actually not about the game. Well, wait a second. That doesn't make any sense. That sounds counterintuitive. Of course, it's about the game. I'm trying to market and sell the game. All marketing is about value. I'm sure some of you have seen these types of ads where you get a person and they're showing like gameplay and they think, like, are you an idiot? Like, move left, like take that one out. And we're all yelling at our screen and we're trying to, explain like, that's so dumb. Like, how are you not getting this from a puzzle perspective? Well, what are they doing actually? If we think about this, they're actually tapping into an emotional response from you. It's not about the game. All they're trying to do is make you feel that you are smart enough to complete this in order to drive you to download it to prove that you are smart enough to complete this puzzle. Doesn't matter what the game is. There's dozens of advertisings out there that follow this exact same premise. They are targeting your intelligence, not the game. So video game marketing is about delivering value to the right audience. In some cases, the intelligence, but really that value is, oh, I'm smarter than this person playing the game right now. I can complete this myself. There's a value message in there. That's how we think about video game marketing. Here's an example of a couple of value statements. I enjoy opportunities to relax. Doesn't matter what the game is. That's what I enjoy. It's great when I get to meet new people. So there are some social multiplayer games where I get to meet new people. I love building and customizing things. How do I test my personal skills? I'm not great at PvP or nonstop combat. What's the week's new chapter about? I hate toxic people. Like, none of these are actually about the game. They are about the experience that the consumer or the player is going to have by playing the game. And that's how you have to market. You would build a marketing strategy around, say, meeting new people or around customizing things. And it just so happens that your game allows for those types of features. Some quick essential questions that you should ask as part of that marketing strategy and communication. One, who are they? Who are my players? Where do they spend the time? What value do they bring, or do you bring? What value do you bring from the game to them? Back to those questions. And why should they even care about your game? It's not about the graphics. It's not about the play style. It's not about the type of game it is. These are the things that people are going to care about when you're communicating and sharing about your game to them. Demo, last one real quick here so that we can get to some questions for everybody. Attracting players, then investors. That's what your demo needs to do. It needs to first attract players and then attract investors. If you can attract players, most likely the investors are going to come, or at least it's going to be a lot easier for you. There are I mean, I've experienced it personally. There are dozens and dozens of publishers and investors that basically are going to say something like, "Can you show me the data?" Like, "Oh, great idea, great concept, love it, but show me the data." It's show me the money. We could argue back to them, but no, they're going to want to see success metrics. They're going to want to see how your game is doing, and then they're going to want to get involved with it. And this is one that we get asked a lot, which is, does the quality matter? You can think about this. You could create a good demo, you could create a cheap demo, you could create a fast demo. All of those are valuable, but somewhere in between is what you really want to target. You don't want to get too long in your development cycle. You don't want to get too costly in that process. You don't want to spend so much time on building high quality. That's all going to delay. You want to understand what your players want. You want to build something. You want to get it to market. I remember for Muddy Robot, when we started to first initially pitch our games, it was in the first couple of weeks of development, and we had something already. And one of the biggest responses was, "Oh, you already have something to show?" Yeah. Yeah. Because we were able to get something out and get into that process and mindset. This is the very first screenshot ever, or at least the oldest screenshot known for World of Warcraft. So I'm not sure if there's any World of Warcraft fans out there, but if you look at this screenshot and you compare it to what we have today with the War Within, completely different in terms of style and design. But here's an example of quickly building something so that you can demo it, whether or not it's complete or not. And here's another screenshot. On the left was the initial loading screen for your characters for World of Warcraft. And then on the right is the most recent one as of, today. And so again, you can see a clear difference. You don't have to have it perfect. You just have to have enough where you can show it. Here's another example. I have some great stories, but one of the stories was a friend of mine who went in to pitch a game, and all they basically had were stick figures, and they just went around and the stick figures were able to do the things that they want, and they talked through it, and they handed the controller to somebody to play, and they're like, "Here, you can play it with the controller," and they're playing around with stick figures, and everybody was like, "Oh wow, this is really fun." So it's another example of how you can do this pretty quickly without much effort. So our final, now what? What do we do? So here's our ABCs, Ds, E's, and F's. Set clear ambitions. Make sure that you're defined what that vision is. Set realistic, achievable goals. Make sure you're delivering as part of that process on a weekly basis. Build intentionally. Foster a culture where you can still be creative, but you are continuously improving, and always keep the players in mind. Have something that you can deliver on a weekly basis. And then communicate strategically. Maintain your transparency internal. The signs of a successful leader is one that can actually communicate transparently to their team. It is so critical that you take that away today. And then be able to engage and communicate equally transparently with all of your external audiences. And then craft a compelling demo. It doesn't have to be high quality. It doesn't have to be amazing. It should work. It should be free of bugs. It should show the core gameplay. It needs to have a strong first impression, but it has to also be compelling and meet the needs of the players, as we've been talking about. And then, of course, go and engage and get that feedback and make this a part of your continuous process. Continually talk to people, continually talk to players, continually talk to your team, continually improve. Like, all of this is a part of the process. We go back to the ambition versus passion. The process of building art and business together is how you're going to be successful. And you can only do that by continuously getting the feedback and making that feedback a part of your process. So there we go. That's all for today. I know we're right here at a perfect time for questions. And so let's do it.
Great job. So I figured I would give the people who are raising their hand in chat. So we have one for option 2, another for 2. So this is the first one that you did for how people would do stuff. Another for
Oh, so a
2,
lot of people pick 2. They would want
2.
to make the money.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make money other than art. That's
Well,
great.
we got some ones
We do have
that
some
came
ones
in.
there. Yep, there they are.
We also have one that is neither. Their game studio would be fulfilling the goal that they set, being educational and valuable to others.
There you go.
And then, yeah, started with option 1, moved to option 2.
Well, that's good.
Oh, we have another one that's always wanted option 2, but keep getting sucked back to option 1.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that is a common theme and challenge. I think a lot of times, we go into it thinking, "Oh, we're going to make a lot of money." And then we start to justify, "Well, I would just like to make a game."
All right, so for our first question, we have AO Games on YouTube. I'm wondering how you go about asking players in the pre-production phase or prior to looking for a publisher.
Yeah, this is a good question. And there's a lot of ways that you can approach this. So, the easiest one is actually to do some sort of survey. And you could just put together some basic questions in a survey and then get that out there. And even if you started, like, say, at a college, or if you started posting the survey in different message groups or forums to try to attract people to come and answer those questions to get some of that feedback. And this has, again, it has nothing to do with the game. All you're doing is trying to uh, put together a sense of what people are looking for. A good example of this is we actually posted on LinkedIn a question last week that was, in mobile games, what are you looking for? What keeps you coming back and engaged? And some of the responses were things like progression and rewards, or leaderboards, right? So I didn't actually talk about the game. I just talked about a functionality that I was curious what people thought of. And that gave us some insights. The other thing that you can do is actually just do your own research, and message forums like Reddit, as an example, are great places to start getting an idea of what people are thinking about. You can go and you could, one way you could do this is ask a question inside of Google. Google, through either Gemini AI or through, the search algorithms, would come up with some potential websites that have talked about that particular topic. And then you can go and you can read what people say. So if we think again back onto like mobile games, like what do you think makes mobile games successful? And then go read the message forums and see what people are saying and see what people like and what people don't like, and think about that and collect that data. You can also do it on LinkedIn. You could do it on social media. You can do it on Twitter/X. Like, there, you can do YouTube. Go do a research on YouTube for a specific type of question and see what people are talking about. That's how you start to do the initial research. From there, yeah, you can bring people in. You could ask openly, like, "Hey, we're looking for 10 people to take a look at this game. We're going to sit in a Zoom call, as an example. We're going to show you the game and we're going to ask you questions and get your feedback." So you can start doing something like that as well as you advance.
Awesome. Let's pull up our next one. From Emily on YouTube, how did you at Robot do your early market research? How did you become confident that you'd found a viable player base?
Yeah, so all of the same stuff that I've been talking about. I had a theme or a concept of what I thought might be a good game, and then I went out to try to validate that. So in my case, I did start with a game concept, but before we started building that game concept, I did the market research. I went and said, okay, is a similar game out there? And I went through all the Play stores to look for similar games. Are people playing this type of game? And then I went and did market research to determine, like, oh yeah, these types of games are making this much money. I then did go through forums. I did go through social media. I did start to read what people had to say about these different types of games. And then I just started to accumulate that to come up with a thesis, a hypothesis of, would this be a successful game? And once I got to that point, then we started to build. And then after we built, then I went back and started bringing people in to validate it.
All right. We have one from Desiree on YouTube. Would building the game mechanics with different characters work, or would it give me reliable data? Or is the characters in the storyline important to display from the start?
So there's a lot of different things in here, but let's just kind of break it down to the last question, which is, do characters and storyline are they important to display from the start? So this goes into, do people like stories in games? That would be the first question. Like, how many games out there tell stories? Well, there are a lot of games out there that are story or narrative driven. And then you start to dive into that a little bit. And then you start to find the people who specifically like narrative based games. And then you start to figure out, like, is our story something that people would be interested in? I think all of that gives you an insight as to specifically like characters and storyline, is that important? If you find that you are a narrative based game and you find that the audience that you are trying to appeal to likes stories and characters, then maybe that's also your marketing strategy, is to lead with that, to say, hey, we're a narrative based game. I'll give you an example, a quick example of this. Um, there are obviously a lot of different types of stories out there. If we even think about the movies, you've got various streaming platforms, all with different types of movies and content that's out there. And obviously, there's a rating system. So you've got kid and friendly types of content. You've got more R-rated type of content, etc. Obviously, those are serving different types of audiences, etc. So you could go through and you could do like narrative based games, and you might make the argument, like, right now in the gaming industry, a lot of the narrative and story driven games are typically role playing games, and they're typically serving a particular audience. For example, right, there's a lot of mature rated RPG story based games. So you might say, well, wait a second, there's a need right now for more family friendly or fantasy based types of games, less mature in themes. And so then your whole pitch is, we are creating a narrative and storyline that's for everyone, not just the mature audience. That process of going through what is out in the market, what people are looking for, and then trying to find something that differentiates yourself, is that process that we've been talking about. You've got to do the research, and then you've got to figure out where your product fits into that mix.
I love story games. Like, love, love, love. And the more lore to everything, the better for me.
Yeah.
Right. We have another one from you two. Nizam says, how do you find what marketing strategy is best for your game? For me, I have a psychological horror, and it's been challenging to get the right strategy and approach to get people interested.
Yeah. So I'm, nothing against your game or your concept or your idea here, but this is the process that we're talking about. So one of the first questions you might ask yourself is, why did we decide to build a psychological horror? Do people even want to play a psychological horror? Do we have an audience that is out there building psychological, interested in asking for psychological horror games? So this is an example of passion versus ambition, or, this is like a passion personal project that I want to build versus this is something that I know the industry actually wants and potentially could make money. As you get more narrow, it becomes increasingly more difficult to find an audience for that particular type of game. is there an audience? Are there people out there looking for psychological horror games? I'm sure there are, right? But you begin to narrow that down. And so if you actually started with the customer or the player base and you said, like, I'm looking for a player base that likes psychological horror, then your marketing becomes a lot easier because you've already identified who that audience is and how you could market them. But by starting potentially with, hey, I want to build a psychological horror game, and then I got to figure out like who the audience is, that's backwards. And that's what we don't want to do. And so again, it's not saying that you can't find that audience, but you're gonna have to go and do the research and find the audience and figure out who are the types of people who like this, and then start building a marketing strategy around that. So an example might be, well, the people who want to play a psychological horror game also tend to like slasher, types of movies. It's almost Halloween time. Like it's a perfect time to introduce the combination between like Halloween, Friday the 13th, psychological horror, and you start to figure out if you can build some sort of interesting strategy that connects what people are already interested in and already following. But I would still argue that your better solution is to figure out, who wants to play those types of games, and then figure out how you're going to build a game that meets those needs.
I'm raising my hand. I want to
Yeah,
play those games. I
there
I
you
want
go.
to play them.
There you go.
Me.
Yeah, the audience I'm sure is there, but what I do see is that it gets narrower and narrower the more specific that you get. And so the challenge between like a broad game, like, hey, we're a narrative driven game, is much more broader than a very specific psychological horror, which makes it even more complex in terms of how you're going to market that.
Yeah. All right. We have time for just one more question, and then we have to pass it over to our next panelist. So we'll get this up. Max on LinkedIn, at what point can you feel confident that your initial idea is validated enough to begin assembling a team around it, especially when compensation isn't guaranteed? How do you start bringing people on board in these early stages?
Well, I think the validation also has to come from the team. Like you need people who want to work on the game because they think the game is an interesting idea as well. So some of your initial validation is actually the team itself. There's a fine line between hiring somebody because they need a job, and look, there's a lot of people out there in the industry that need jobs, and hey, I'm just willing to work anywhere, versus I really want to work on this game because it's interesting and it's something that I would like to work on. I don't really want anybody working on a game that they don't really genuinely want to work on. Like they have to have equal amount of in this case passion for the project as I do. So I think there is some validation in there. Is like, find some people who are interested in working on it with you. Sit down with them, show them the game, see what their interest level is, see if they like the game or not like the game, and then start to see if you can build a team around that. That's your quick, easy validation. But then the other concept would be to reach back out and say, okay, I've done my market research. I've talked to players. I've got a sense of what they want. Here's the idea that I have. You may pick one or two of them and go back to them and say, if I had a game that did this and this and this, would you be interested in playing it? And ask the question and see what they respond with. So yeah, between continuing to talk to the players and then continuing to bring people onto your team that could also help you validate that, that's where I would start.
Great job. Thank you so much for your time and all of your amazing knowledge today, Chris. Up next, we have Larry with the topic from startup to beloved, building your studio's reputation. So just hang tight. They're going to be live in just a few seconds. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yep. Thanks.